what's the course of life that you're hoping for yourself? We are living longer, and people don't want to outlive their money. And, it may be that, people need to start thinking ahead of, if these are some of the goals and dreams that I have, what do I need to do to be able to support that?
Hey y'all, it's Kosta. Today, I'm here with my guest, Dr. Dorian Mintzer, experienced therapist, life and retirement transition coach, relationship coach, executive coach, author, speaker, and teacher. Today, we're talking about what no one told you about retirement. Dr. Mintzer, in 2023, what does a successful retirement look like?
Well, I hate to disappoint some of your listeners to say there is no right way to retire. There are many different pictures of what a successful retirement looks like. Because now that we're living longer, somebody may be retired from their full-time work and still want to be working in some different ways and using their skills and having maybe an encore career, or maybe even wanting to phase out their retirement during many of the quote retirement years. And many people are just burned out, and a successful retirement might be a honeymoon stage initially. But then what I find is that people begin to feel like something's missing. And so I think a successful retirement is when people have taken stock on what has work meant to them, what's been important, what are the things about work that maybe they need and want to build into their life, like a reason to get out of bed in the morning, some structure, some sense of connection, engagement, purpose, and meaning. So from my perspective, what I see with people is that a successful retirement really is people who are feeling a sense of well-being, maybe using their skills in a different way, perhaps volunteering, maybe, giving back in some ways, writing, memoir writing, having some time to really enjoy, and becoming what I like to think about as an elder, which is developing a perspective and a wisdom that you're able to share with younger generations. So a successful retirement is, I think, people who feel engaged and vital and connected to the world, maybe still through their work, but maybe having made peace with my identity isn't just my work, and there are many other parts of myself that I want to develop in this stage of life.
One of the things that I find so curious is how somebody that's 25 years old, or let me put it like this, 35 years old, and maybe is married and has some kids, and somebody that is 65 or 75 years old and that's raised children and has, essentially worked a full career, how differently they approach life and problems. And maybe if you could just share from your perspective, like, how do people change their problem-solving habits and behaviors as they get older?
Well, what an interesting question. Well, I think in many ways we are who we are.
Right.
But I think what's important is that there are certain experiences in life that if we allow ourselves, we can learn from. And so we develop a perception, we develop a sense of our own resilience, we develop hopefully appreciation of other people. And I think that if one's on kind of that growth trajectory, then, as we get older, we're really able to deal in different ways with uncertainty, in different ways with the complexities of life.
Sure.
There've actually been some interesting studies during COVID that younger people had more difficulty because of still potentially working, maybe having children at home, not having a sense of having gone through a lot of ups and downs. So I think there's something that comes from just experiencing the vicissitudes of life, really, and knowing that somehow we learn how to deal with the ups and downs and good and bad of life, and develop an internal kind of compass and confidence. Because when you think about it, all of life really is a series of transitions. And what I find really interesting is, it's true when you're 25 or 35, you've had less transitions, but you still may start having a pattern of, do you have more trouble with the ending, the unknown, the new beginning? By the time you get older, you've had more transitions. And I think important to ask the same kind of questions. Do you have more trouble with the unknowns, the messy middle, the new beginning, the unknowns? But to begin to, if you allow yourself, learn about yourself, and I think just have a greater perspective. I think, you can really in your 60s and 70s develop this new identity of being an elder where you just appreciate kind of the ups and downs of life.
And on that note, how can we more accurately predict what we actually need to retire?
Now, are you meaning that money-wise or
Well,
general-wise?
I'd say probably both.
Okay. I'm not a financial planner, and I'm not a
Right.
believer that there's a number, because what I believe is that how much you have really, and how much you need is really based on what kind of lifestyle you want and maybe what kind of lifestyle you have. Again, there's no right way. I think retirement is money, but it's more than money. And if you think about it, money it's a tool, it's a resource. Sometimes it gets overvalued and we think, that it is just that number. But I think people are learning more and more that there's the quote soft part. I like the framework of puzzle, that there are all these pieces in our life. And I like puzzle because we have to puzzle it out as well as it's a noun. But there are all these parts of our life: finances, health and wellness, where we live, who's important in our life, closeness and intimacy, spirituality, meaningful relationships, obligations with family, legacy. All
Sure.
of those things are puzzle pieces and they impact each other. And so I think money and health and wellness are two of the biggest puzzle pieces that are going to impact the choices that you have. They may impact how long you work,
Right.
where you live.
Well, and also to that note, money and health and wellness are prerequisites almost to being able to have a long and happy retirement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And although the caveat of that is money doesn't buy happiness.
Yes.
And that is very important. And I think that it is amazing that there are many people who don't have an abundance of money, but they have maybe a mindset that's more abundant rather than scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And with that sort of growth mindset, it's amazing the happiness, the sense of well-being that people can have.
Yeah. What do you think is the most overlooked aspect of retirement planning?
Well, I think even doing it is part of it. I think some people sort of think, I don't need to plan it. I can just wing it. It'll
Sure.
just all fall into place. I'm just so happy I don't have to work. Some people feel that way. I really think it's very important at whatever age you are to start thinking about, what's the course of life that you're hoping for yourself. We are living longer and people don't want to outlive their money. And, it may be that, people need to start thinking ahead of, if these are some of the goals and dreams that I have, what do I need to do to be able to support that? So I really encourage people to think ahead and plan. It's like a financial portfolio. It's not written in stone, but I think it's helpful to have a vision. And if you're part of a relationship, to look at your vision, your partner's vision, see where they align, where they're different. And if it's not a partner, it may be siblings or it may be good friends. It may be whoever's on, sort of on the journey with you, to really think about, if I want hopefully to reach the end of my life without regrets, if there are things I want to accomplish, do, see, say, then come back to now, whatever your age is, and start thinking about, well, how am I going to make that happen? And that's where the planning comes in.
I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I follow a lot of the statistics in for retirement planning, just retiring in general, aging, things like that. And one of the things that I find most fascinating is about 22% of the US population actually saves for retirement. And on average, they only save about 200,000 to 300,000. And I mean, that's not a whole lot if you're wanting to retire for an extended period of time. Granted, there are such things as obviously Social Security and VA benefits and sometimes even a pension. I mean, if me and Morgan were just talking about this, I know that's what I'm saying. Right. Like, where are you going to find a company that pays you a pension nowadays?
Right. That is in the past.
Yes,
more so in the past. Yeah.
But with that being said, if people are taking the time to plan for their retirement, in your opinion, because I have some opinions on this, but I want to hear your opinions about the greatest risks for derailing retirement plans and how do we avoid them?
Well, I think sort of what I was alluding to before, I think health. I mean, there's so many unknowns in the world. I mean, can be economic downturns. There can be health. I mean, you might have a vision that you're going to work a certain number of years and that either you or, someone close to you, child, spouse, partner, sibling, parents, has a health crisis. And
Sure.
that can just kind of put everything into kind of a chaos crisis mode. So I think that can derail. I think another thing that can derail is and this may seem more subtle, but if your only sense of yourself is your work and you're not either by choice or life circumstances not working, you can really go downhill. There can be a dark side to not having a sense of the connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. I think too much isolation, can be a derailer. I think that, if in fact somebody's, maybe it's a retirement isn't by choice, unfortunately the statistics say that, people can drink too much, use drugs, and really go through a real bad rabbit hole. But it doesn't have to be that way, but it can. I mean, there are many things that can be derailers. And that's where I think planning is helpful. I mean, it's true. I think your percentage is probably right on about the number of people who plan, even those who do have some retirement savings. Health costs can come up. There may be, tuition costs for children. There's even a recent article about even the tuition that older people are still paying off. Or people
really?
who go back to school. Yeah, and people
Wow.
who want to go back to school. And when I think when you go bankrupt, you still have to pay loans. And
you do. Student loans, yeah.
And so many people have thought that they've been saving for retirement, but then, many are in what has been referred to as that sandwich generation. So taking care of parents, having children, and maybe even wanting to retrain yourself, and things cost money.
What's interesting about that is I was having dinner with some friends who are some in the millennial generation and they're in the Gen X. And I feel like Gen X really got a bad hand.
Yeah.
Like if you really take it into like, obviously, millennials and Gen Zs probably can't afford to buy a house, but Gen X is just, they are under a lot of pressure. When you talk about sandwich, I'm thinking more of like vice grip.
Yeah, right. Or squeezed vice grip. Yeah. And I think that's probably more apt metaphor. It's true.
Yeah.
And it used to be that parents wanted the next generation to be better off.
Right.
And, and that's where it's, falling by the wayside somewhat.
But I'm optimistic that things will start to improve because we're having more and more of these types of conversations are starting to occur, and people are like, I don't know if this is actually supposed to be like this, Right. So, all right, moving on. As a retirement coach, do you think that there's a difference between what people think they want and what they actually want out of retirement?
I think that's true. And again, it may vary if one has done some reflecting and thinking ahead of time. So, I say it's true, but it depends in a sense. There are many different kind of retirees. I mean, there are, and many different kind of visions that people have. I mean, some people really have loved their work and want to keep working and want to keep contributing, maybe not full time, but in some capacity. Some people are just totally burnt out. When you think about it, the concept retirement, I think, is changing. It used to be, back when Social Security was developed, people had more industrial jobs. And people were, by the time they were in their 60s, they were burnt out. It's very different now in the 21st century. Not only are we living longer, but there's just more desk work.
Sure.
There's more head kind of work. I mean, not totally. So, what somebody wants from retirement may vary depending on what your prior experiences were. I mean, I think there's always been this vision that there's more time for leisure. And many people, I think, as I mentioned before, there can be this honeymoon phase. But kind of like this expression, there's only so much golf you can play or so much sailing. And I think COVID put a crimp in the fantasy of traveling. I mean, it's opening up again, but, it still exists. But I think, sometimes people don't think ahead and realize what it's going to feel like not to have a paycheck if you're not getting a paycheck, or not to have that identity if it's been so much of your identity. So retirement sometimes can feel structureless until you realize it's okay to have, and you need actually some structure in your life. Exercising, taking care of yourself. I always like the statistic that by the time you're 65, it's 30% genetics, which is not insignificant if you've got some genetic components, but 70% are things you can have some control over. Lifestyle choices, taking care of your body and your brain, spirituality, meaningful relationships. So if you think just doing nothing, if that's the vision you have of retirement, you probably will end up being unhappy. If it's, I do think that, again, there are different stages of retirement, but if, some people actually have a good picture of retirement and they combine in beautiful ways, some volunteering, maybe a little bit of working, time with family, time with friends, time for traveling, time for leisure. I mean, some people truly do create, what they were envisioning, but some don't.
So when I was listening to your TEDx, one of the things that you mentioned in there is that our perception of middle age is actually shifted, and it's more between the ages of 55 and 75.
Right.
So I want you to touch on that and kind of explain it, but also I'm curious, I'm sure you've done some research and have seen the statistics on this, but how long do you think people will be living in the next 20 to 30 years? Will we be living into 125 or 150? I mean, I hope we are, but just curious.
Well, there are a few questions in there. So
Sorry,
but in terms of lifespan, a lot of people now are talking about health span,
okay,
not just lifespan. So, I truly myself am a believer that it's not just the number of years, but I'd like to live a good long time, but I also have a sense of what for me quality of life is. So that just adding, little years to my belt, if it doesn't feel like a quality of life, I'm not so sure I want that. Statistics are saying that kids born now have a 50-50 chance to live into their hundreds. I don't know that it's going to get to, way over 100. It could. But again, it's hard to know. But I do think that with the extension of lifespan now, and hopefully health span, which is being able to feel and be kind of in the middle age, not old and, more unable to do things, that's maybe more at the final end. But during, it is interesting to think about this extended middle age. It used to be 40 to 60, and 60 was old. Now it's, as you say, 50 to or 55 to 75. It's like a second adulthood, or some people actually even call it middlescence now. That, adolescence was a term coined maybe 100 or 100 plus years ago. Because there was an awareness that there was a time between being a child and being an adult, and issues about who am I, where do I want to live, what do I want to do, parallels, if you think about it. So now we have this extended middle age, and people are realizing, first of all, 62 or 65 might be too young to retire, because if we're living longer and want to have some lifestyle choices, we may need to work longer if we're able to, and in
Absolutely.
a profession maybe where we can. And so, thinking about the parallels to adolescence is we're dealing with our identity. We're dealing with where do I want to live, which is your area too. Who do I want to be connected to? Parallel things, but hopefully at this middlescent stage, the second adulthood, we have an added perspective and wisdom of just having weathered a lot of the ups and downs of life. But there is this transition. And I think I really find it so helpful and freeing to think about this extended middle age. It really is a time to keep growing, learning, and evolving. And it's not the old paradigm of aging, which is it's all downhill after 60. It will be if you want it to be, and let it be, but it really doesn't have to be. There's many, many choices that are out there.
Let's say somebody doesn't plan for retirement, or just doesn't have a plan in general. What's your advice to the children of parents that have no retirement plan?
Another good and hard question. It's interesting. Sometimes adult children don't want to bring up things to parents, and sometimes parents don't want to bring up things to younger adult children.
Sure.
But it is important to have a conversation. I mean, I'm a believer that conversations, and they can be very difficult ones, but it's important to talk about. So, a son or a daughter can maybe sit down and not you aren't doing, that's blaming, shaming you statements, you should be, you're not. But to say, I'm worried about you. I'm worried that as far as I know, I don't think you've been thinking about this at all. And I worry, are you going to be able to keep working in the way that you are now? Or what happens if there are health issues? I'd like us to sit down and talk about it. So if you can use an I statement, and, if you're in a situation where you're not used to talking together and you're able to have it be just the start, let it be a short conversation to start with, but then know that you can come back to it. But I really do think they're hard conversations to have, but I think whether you're the adult trying to talk to, or the parent trying to talk to your adult children, or adult children talking to your parents, try to think about using I statements. Avoid you don't, you should, you never. Those, even if your heart is not intended that way, it's blaming and shaming, and people get defensive. But it's really important conversations. I'm worried about you. I don't think you have had enough money saved. Can we just figure out, what do you have in mind? What have you taken care of? What haven't you taken care of? And this can be tied in also to end of life issues and wishes. If the adult children are going to be, healthcare proxies or power of attorney, it's so important to have these conversations. And people often put it off. It's tied into your question about why people don't plan. Sometimes people don't want to plan because if you think ahead, then you have to think about, I'm not going to live forever. And, people like to avoid that.
Yeah. And I mean, literally, when you say they want to avoid it or they'd like to avoid it, like I have heard from so many people when I say, why are you not having a more thoughtful conversation with your parents about preparing for long-term care or just buying long-term care insurance?
Right.
It's because we're wired in this way that we know that death is an inevitability,
Right.
but we don't think about it because when you accept that component, at least this is what the greater society teaches you, that once you accept that component, then you're essentially going against your instincts. And you're not going to live every single day to the fullest. But I believe that it's the opposite.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I honestly believe that knowing that death exists and none of us are going to live forever makes life more precious.
Right.
And I also believe that it's an act of love to sit down with parents and adult children or whomever. I mean, not everybody has children, but whoever's important in your life, to sit down and talk about these things. It's an act of love because, if you don't, then, if something happens unexpectedly and, you died suddenly. I mean, we see it happen all the time with natural disasters too, or with terrorist attacks, or many, many different ways. At the time of loss and crisis, it's hard enough. And so if the survivors are left not knowing what you would like, it compounds it. So I view it as an act of love. And just on a personal example, like what is about 40 years ago now, when my father was dying, he used to be a pretty controlling person, and I didn't like that, but I liked that he was controlling in this way. And my brother and I flew out to California where they lived, and he knew he was sick and he knew he was dying. And we didn't know when it was going to be, but he said, we need to talk. And my brother said, no, I don't think we need to talk. And I said, yes, we do. And it was so helpful. And it really helped me appreciate that he gave us the information about what the accounts were, where keys were. I got my name on the checking account, not to have it and, but it was or, and knowing that I wasn't going to do it unless I had to. Talked about what he wanted, end of life. My mother talked about what she wanted. I was her healthcare proxy. My brother was his. It was such a relief to have that information. So when he did die, it still took a while to deal with all the stuff we had to deal with. But we knew the passwords. I mean, that's another thing. We have a digital life as well as a real life. And it's an act of love to survivors that at the time when you need to take over, that you know how to do it and you know who to turn to. So I speak from personal experience, and I work with my clients on that too. Mm-hmm. So
before we wrap up, I want to talk about everyone's favorite topic, inflation. How does inflation impact retirement, and how much can inflation change someone's retirement plans?
I do know that everybody is focused on inflation. I think inflation's part of it, but not the whole thing. I mean, I think the reality is things cost money, and that sometimes they cost more money, other times maybe less money. I think the issue from my perspective is we're living longer and we really don't want to outlive our money.
Right.
So I think if right now there's some inflation, that needs to inform in some way, your notions about when to retire. People, I think it's, the idea of 62 or 65, it really was when the lifespan was much shorter. I think it is really helpful, whether it be inflation or knowing there's the unknown of healthcare needs or whatever else might happen in the economy. Many people, it is important to rethink that the 62, 65 is not such a magical age. And if you really want to have, options for your lifestyle choices, then part of it may be needing to recognize that you need to work longer. It doesn't necessarily mean working longer full time, but it may be that part of your retirement vision is, let's not work as much, but let's still bring some money in so that, you're adding to your nest egg.
What is the more appropriate age to retire? If it's not 62 and 65, and I know you're not saying that it's just a specific number, but like if you were a policymaker and you had to put a number on when people should retire and bring it back to when they first created the law in 1937, where Social Security was, eligible at age X. What age is more appropriate now?
I think more and more people are working into their 70s.
Yeah.
But part of it depends on what the kind of work is. Some people truly reach their prime in their 70s. And I'm in my late 70s. I still work and love it. My husband actually just turned 91. He still works part-time.
That's awesome.
And so there's no right, but he is doing it because he loves doing it.
Right.
And, not everybody loves their work, but if you can, if you're so lucky to have a profession that you do love, or, the beauty of getting older is it's not too late to learn something new.
Mm-hmm.
And you might want to morph some of the skills you have into something else and maybe work in a different way. But I think I'm seeing more and more people work into their 70s. I think early 60s is way too early. But again, if people have some physical issues or it's a really difficult job in terms of stamina and their, health issues and stuff like that, maybe you do need to work later. But think about how you might be able to repurpose some of the skills you have if you still need to earn some additional money.
Sure.
So you have more choices.
We always like to end the show with a call to action. For anyone that feels behind or like they didn't start preparing early enough, what can we all do today to start planning for a better retirement?
So I always say it's never too late and it's never too early. It's harder when it's later, but I think it's not too late. So I think I'm a believer, no matter how much or how little money you have, to talk with a financial planner, preferably one that has what's called a holistic view, which is they're viewing money as a tool and helping you really think about what your lifestyle options are and what you want. But I think that would be one way to start. I think that there's a lot of resources out there. I actually have if it's okay to say, I have a monthly free webinar series on the fourth Tuesday of each month, free, open to public and the professionals, called Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Experts series to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. I encourage you, it's free. Sign-up's always the week before, and it's every month except December. I'm in my 11th year of it. And to celebrate the 10th year, starting last year, the earlier interviews are now released as podcasts that you also can have access to for free. So there's a lot that I have out there. There are other organizations out there. So I think it's helpful to think about, it's not too late. You can talk with a financial planner, there are retirement coaches around, talk with friends. Often people don't think they should talk about retirement, next stage of life. I really encourage you to realize you're not alone. And there's a lot of help and support available to you. So that would be kind of some little action steps.